The summer heat clung to Emma Hayes like a second skin as she drove down the winding road toward Johnson Creek. Her rented sedan crawled along the cracked asphalt, the familiar Kentucky hills rising around her. 20 years had passed since she'd left, and now her grandmother's death had pulled her back to this hollow. A historian specializing in Appalachian family studies at Boston University, Emma had spent her career studying other people's pasts while carefully avoiding her own. The radio crackled with static, and Emma switched it off. The silence felt heavier somehow. Her phone had lost reception miles back, leaving her truly alone with her thoughts. Gripping the steering wheel tighter, she rounded the final bend in the road, and there it was. Her grandmother's house, a weathered two-story farmhouse that seemed to sink into the earth under its own weight. "Just get through the week," she muttered to herself. "Clean it out, sign the papers, and go." The house had been in the family for generations, passed down from mother to daughter since before the Civil War. Emma's mother had broken tradition when she fled to Cincinnati with 18-year-old Emma in tow, never to return. Now, with both her mother and grandmother gone, Emma was the last of the Hayes women. She parked in the overgrown driveway and sat motionless, staring at the peeling paint and sagging porch. Something about the place had always felt wrong, even in her childhood memories. Emma grabbed her suitcase from the back seat and approached the house reluctantly. The key turned with surprising ease in the lock. The door swung open with a groan, releasing the stale air of abandonment. Emma stepped inside, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. The furniture was draped in white sheets, ghostly forms in the dim light filtering through dusty windows. In the kitchen, Emma set down her bag and inspected her surroundings. The old cast-iron stove remained, though it hadn't been used in years. The linoleum floor was cracked and peeling at the edges. Emma remembered her grandmother sweeping that floor obsessively, muttering prayers under her breath as she did. A sharp knock at the door startled her. Emma found a middle-aged man in overalls standing on the porch, hat in hand. "Miss Hayes? I'm Sheriff Daniels. I heard you'd be coming. Your grandmother's lawyer asked me to check in." "Thank you," Emma replied, not inviting him inside. "I'm just getting settled." The sheriff nodded, his eyes darting past her to the interior of the house. "Folks around here always had stories about this place. Your grandmother was respected, but folks kept their distance." "I'm aware of my family's reputation," Emma said coldly. "Just letting you know I'm around if you need anything. House has been empty nearly 6 months. Might have some critters moved in." After the sheriff left, Emma returned to the kitchen. The fading daylight cast long shadows across the floor. She opened the refrigerator, empty and unplugged, smelling faintly of mildew. Takeout would have to do for dinner. As she turned to leave, Emma's foot caught on an uneven section of the linoleum. She knelt down, examining the floor more closely. One section seemed different from the rest. Newer, perhaps. Running her fingers along the edge, she felt a distinct seam where it had been cut and replaced. The hair on Emma's arm stood on end as she recalled fragments of whispered conversations from her childhood. Stories of the Johnson family, who had lived here in the 1920s, before the Hayes family took over the property. Stories her grandmother had forbidden her to repeat. Something was buried beneath this floor. And Emma had the sinking feeling that her grandmother's lawyer hadn't told her everything about her inheritance. The first night in her grandmother's house passed fitfully. Emma tossed and turned on the old mattress, the springs creaking with every movement. The house seemed to breathe around her, settling and shifting in the darkness. Twice she woke to what sounded like footsteps on the stairs, only to find nothing when she gathered the courage to check. Morning brought little relief. Emma sat at the kitchen table with a cup of instant coffee, staring at the section of uneven linoleum. The logical part of her brain, the historian, the academic, told her to start with the attic. Family secrets were typically preserved in boxes and trunks, hidden away where curious eyes wouldn't find them. The pull-down attic stairs protested as Emma tugged them from the ceiling. Dust rained down, and she coughed, covering her mouth with her sleeve. The attic was stifling, the summer heat trapped under the roof making it nearly unbearable. Sweat beaded on Emma's forehead as she clicked on her flashlight and swept its beam across the space. Cardboard boxes and old furniture crowded the low-ceilinged room. A child's rocking horse sat in one corner, its painted eyes watching Emma as she moved past. She began opening boxes methodically, finding Christmas decorations, old clothing, and photo albums filled with faded images of stern-faced relatives. In the farthest corner, beneath a stack of quilts, Emma found a wooden chest bound with iron. Unlike the other items in the attic, this chest was free from dust, as if it had been regularly maintained. The lock was new, incongruous against the aged wood. "Damn it," Emma muttered, tugging uselessly at the padlock. She'd need to find the key or break it open. As she turned to leave, her flashlight beam caught something etched into the side of the chest. Leaning closer, Emma made out a name and date. Sarah Johnson, 1924. The Johnson family, the previous owners. Back downstairs, Emma searched through her grandmother's desk, finding nothing but bills and correspondence with her lawyer. In the kitchen drawer, however, tucked beneath a stack of dish towels, she discovered a small key attached to a ribbon. The key fit perfectly into the chest's padlock. Emma lifted the heavy lid, revealing a collection of items carefully preserved. A leather-bound Bible with names inscribed inside the cover, a bundle of letters tied with string, a small child's shoe, yellowed with age, and a folder containing newspaper clippings. Emma lifted out the Bible first, opening it to the family record page. The Johnson family tree was meticulously documented, with birth dates, marriage dates, and death dates recorded in faded ink. What caught Emma's attention were the names at the bottom of the page. 5 children, all with birth dates between 1920 and 1924, and all with the same death date, December 15th, 1924. 5 children, all dying on the same day. The newspaper clippings told a fragmented story. Local family tragedy read one headline from December 1924. The article described how Jacob and Sarah Johnson had been found dead in their home, an apparent murder-suicide, but provided few details. Another clipping mentioned that the couple had been known for their extreme religious views and had withdrawn from the community in the years before their deaths. No mention of the children. The bundle of letters was addressed to "My dearest sister" and signed Sarah. Emma began reading, her blood running cold as she progressed through them. Sarah Johnson wrote of hearing voices, of believing her children were possessed by evil spirits, of her husband's increasingly fervent prayers and fasting rituals. The final letter, dated December 10th, 1924, was the most disturbing. "The Lord has shown us what must be done. Jacob says we must purify our home and send our little angels back to heaven before they can be corrupted by this world. We will pray over them as they sleep, and then they will know no more pain. After we will place them beneath the hearth, where they will rest until Judgment Day. I'm afraid, but Jacob says this is God's will." Emma dropped the letter, her hands shaking. She looked toward the kitchen, understanding now what lay beneath that uneven section of linoleum. The 5 Johnson children had never left this house. The discovery left Emma reeling. As a historian, she knew she should contact authorities immediately, but something held her back. What if the remains had already been discovered and reburied elsewhere? What if this was just the delusion of a mentally ill woman from a century ago? The rational part of her mind grasped for explanations, even as her instincts screamed that the letter told the truth. Emma decided to walk into town, needing fresh air and perspective. Johnson Creek was little more than a main street with a handful of businesses, a diner, a small grocery, a hardware store, and a church that looked as old as the surrounding hills. At the diner, she ordered coffee and a sandwich, aware of the curious glances from the locals. An elderly woman approached her table, leaning heavily on a cane. "You're Meredith's granddaughter, aren't you? The one who went north for schooling?" Emma nodded, gesturing for the woman to join her. "I'm Emma Hayes." "Ida Thornton. I knew your grandmother since we were girls." The woman settled into the chair with a sigh. She was a complicated woman, carried a heavy burden. "What kind of burden?" Emma asked. Ida glanced around, lowering her voice. "The knowledge, the history of that house. Your grandmother was the keeper." "Keeper of what exactly?" "Some things are better left buried, child. But now it's passed to you." Ida reached across the table, her gnarled fingers closing around Emma's wrist with surprising strength. "They'll try to speak to you. Don't listen, don't dig." Before Emma could press further, Ida released her grip and stood. "Your grandmother did what she had to do to protect this town. Remember that." Back at the house, Emma found herself drawn to the kitchen again. The uneven section of flooring seemed to mock her with its secret. In the hardware store, she had purchased a crowbar, telling herself she needed it for opening crates in the attic. Now she stood over the linoleum, tool in hand. "This is insane," she muttered, but knelt down anyway. The linoleum peeled back easily, revealing a wooden trapdoor underneath. It was newer than the surrounding floor, perhaps installed by her grandmother. Emma's heart hammered in her chest as she wedged the crowbar into the seam and pried upward. The trapdoor lifted with a groan, revealing a small earthen space beneath. The smell that wafted up was not the stench of decomposition, but the musty scent of old earth and something else, something like dried herbs or flowers. Emma shone her flashlight into the hole. There were no bones, no remains. Instead, she found 5 small bundles wrapped in faded cloth, each tied with string and labeled with a name: Thomas, Ruth, Mary, Joseph, and Elizabeth Johnson. Beside them lay a jar of what appeared to be salt, another of dried herbs, and a small, leather-bound book. Emma carefully lifted out the book, her hands trembling. It was a journal, the pages brittle with age. Opening it revealed neat, compact handwriting, her grandmother's. May 12th, 1962. "I have renewed the binding today, as Mother taught me. The salt circle remains unbroken. The whispers have grown louder this month, but they cannot pass through the barrier. I have said the prayers for each child, calling them by name as instructed. They must remain at rest." Entry after entry documented her grandmother's maintenance of whatever ritual she believed was keeping something contained. The last entry was dated just weeks before her death. November 3rd, 2024. "My hands shake too badly now to perform the ritual properly. I fear what will happen when I am gone. I have written to Emma, though I doubt she will come. The Hayes women have always been the keepers, but the line may end with me. God forgive us all for what was done in this house." As Emma read the final words, the lights flickered overhead. A cold draft swept through the kitchen, though all windows were closed. From somewhere deep within the walls came a sound like soft weeping, the cry of a child in distress. Emma slammed the journal shut and backed away from the open trapdoor. The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so complete it felt like pressure against her eardrums. Then, so faint she might have imagined it, a child's voice whispered, "Mama!" Emma barely slept that night, barricading herself in her grandmother's bedroom with a chair propped against the door. The house remained quiet, but every creak and settling sound made her flinch. By morning, exhaustion and hunger drove her back downstairs. The trapdoor in the kitchen remained open, a dark wound in the floor. In daylight, Emma felt a surge of embarrassment at her fear. She was a scholar, a woman of science and reason. There had to be a logical explanation for everything: the journal, the bundles, even the voice she thought she'd heard. After forcing down some toast and coffee, Emma decided to visit the County Historical Society. If anyone had records about the Johnson family tragedy, they would. The Historical Society occupied a converted Victorian house on the edge of town. A bell jingled as Emma entered, finding herself in a cramped room filled with display cases of local artifacts. An elderly man with thick glasses looked up from the desk. "Can I help you?" "I'm researching the history of a property," Emma explained. "The old Johnson place on Hickory Road. My grandmother, Meredith Hayes, was the most recent owner." The man's expression changed subtly. "Hayes? You must be Emma. Your grandmother was one of our most dedicated supporters." "I didn't know that." Meredith understood the importance of preserving history, even the uncomfortable parts. He extended his hand. "I'm Walter Simmons, the director here." Walter led Emma to a research room in the back, pulling out several folders. The Johnson case was quite notorious in its time, though people don't talk about it much anymore. The files contained more newspaper articles, property records, and a police report from 1924. Jacob Johnson, a coal miner turned lay preacher, had established a small congregation that met in his home after the local church expelled him for heretical teachings. His wife Sarah had been known in town as a healer who used folk remedies and prayer. "What happened to their children?" Emma asked carefully. Walter hesitated. "That's where the story gets murky. The official record states that the 5 Johnson children died of influenza in the winter of 1924, before their parents' deaths. They were supposedly buried in the church cemetery. But no graves were ever found. Some believe Jacob Johnson buried them on the property, though no remains were ever discovered." Walter adjusted his glasses. "Your grandmother funded several archaeological surveys of the property in the 1960s and 70s. Nothing conclusive was found." Emma thought of the bundles beneath the kitchen floor. What happened to the property after the Johnsons died? It remained vacant for several years. Then your great-grandmother, Iris Hayes, purchased it in 1932. The Hayes women have owned it ever since. Walter gave her a searching look. "Your grandmother was particularly interested in local folk traditions, protection rituals, warding spells. Some people thought she was eccentric. She was performing rituals at the house," Emma said quietly. "I found her journal." Walter's face paled. "Did you disturb anything, move anything from where she kept it?" "No, Emma stopped herself. The trapdoor was still open, the bundles exposed. "I may have." "You need to put everything back exactly as you found it," Walter said urgently. "The Hayes women have been the keepers for generations. Your grandmother would have prepared you if..." "If what?" "If she thought you were ready to take on the responsibility." On the drive back to the house, Emma's mind raced. Whatever her grandmother had been doing, the entire town seemed to know about it, or at least the older generation did. They had kept the secret, allowed her grandmother to perform her rituals undisturbed. As she pulled into the driveway, Emma noticed something odd. The front door, which she had definitely closed and locked, stood ajar. She approached cautiously, hearing a sound from inside that froze her blood. Children laughing. Emma stood frozen on the porch, the sound of children's laughter emanating from within her grandmother's house. It wasn't menacing or otherworldly. It was the ordinary sound of children at play that made it all the more terrifying. She considered fleeing, driving back to Boston and never returning. But something pulled her forward. The historians need to know, perhaps, or some deeper connection to this place and its secrets. Emma pushed the door open wider. "Hello?" she called, her voice cracking. The laughter stopped abruptly. The house fell silent. Moving cautiously through the front hall, Emma made her way to the kitchen. The trapdoor remained open, the bundles untouched. But arranged in a semicircle around the opening were 5 small handprints in the dust on the floor, as if children had been sitting there, peering down into their own grave. Emma backed away, her heel catching on something. She turned to find a child's toy, a wooden top, hand-carved and painted with faded colors. It hadn't been there earlier. As she stared at it, the top began to spin slowly, seemingly of its own accord. "Stop it!" Emma whispered, then louder. "Stop it!" The top clattered to a halt. From upstairs came the sound of running feet, followed by a door slamming. Emma grabbed her car keys and fled the house. She drove aimlessly, eventually finding herself at the old church cemetery on the outskirts of town. The graveyard was small and well-maintained, with headstones dating back to the early 1800s. Near the back, she found what she was looking for, a row of 5 small markers, all bearing the Johnson name and the same death date, December 1st, 1924, 2 weeks before their parents' deaths, just as Walter had said. But if the children were buried here, what were the bundles beneath her grandmother's kitchen? A shadow fell across the graves. Emma looked up to find Sheriff Daniels standing there, hat in hand. "Figured I'd find you here eventually," he said. "Walter called me." "Did you know?" Emma demanded. "About my grandmother, about what's in that house?" The sheriff sighed. "My grandfather was deputy when it happened. The official story was influenza, but—" He gestured to the graves. "These are empty, for show. Then what my grandmother wrote in her journal is the truth, most likely." Sheriff Daniels knelt down, brushing leaves from one of the small headstones. Jacob Johnson believed his children were possessed. He and his wife killed them as an act of mercy. Then they sealed the bodies under the kitchen floor, believing that would keep the evil spirits trapped. But my grandmother's rituals— Your family moved in and discovered what happened. Instead of reporting it, they took it upon themselves to become keepers, to maintain whatever rituals they believed would keep those children at rest. The sheriff stood, meeting Emma's gaze. "This town has protected your family's secret for generations because your family protected the town. From what? Ghosts? Spirits? That's insane. Maybe, or maybe there's something to it. All I know is that 3 times in the past century the rituals were neglected, and 3 times children in town died under mysterious circumstances." Emma felt the blood drain from her face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that whatever you believe, Emma Hayes, you need to close that trapdoor and learn the rituals. Or you need to bring in authorities and let them remove those remains properly." He placed his hat back on his head. "But I wouldn't leave things as they are, not with night coming." Back at the house, Emma sat in her car, watching as shadows lengthened across the porch. The rational part of her mind insisted that she call the state police, report the bodies, and let science and law handle this. But another part, the part that had heard children laughing in an empty house, that had seen handprints appear in dust, urged caution. Her grandmother's journal lay on the passenger seat. Emma picked it up, turning to the first page she hadn't read before. "To be a keeper is to stand at the threshold between this world and the next. It is to acknowledge that some barriers must never be broken, that some souls cannot find peace. The Johnson children were innocent victims, but what their parents did to them, in the name of God, in the darkness of madness, left a wound in this place. I maintain the rituals not out of superstition, but out of respect for that innocence, and out of fear for what might happen if those wounds are left to fester." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma made her decision. She would learn what her grandmother knew. She would understand this burden before deciding whether to bear it or end it. She stepped out of the car and walked toward the house, the journal clutched to her chest like a shield. From an upstairs window, a small face watched her approach, then vanished into the gathering darkness. Emma stood before the open trapdoor, her grandmother's journal open to the pages describing the ritual. The materials she needed were spread around her: salt, dried herbs, which Walter had identified as sage, rosemary, and yarrow, 5 white candles, and a small silver bell that Emma had found in her grandmother's bedroom drawer. According to the journal, the ritual needed to be performed monthly during the dark of the moon. Tonight wasn't ideal. The moon was waxing, but Emma feared waiting any longer. She began by carefully lifting each bundle from beneath the floor, placing them in a circle around the opening. Each bundle felt impossibly light, as if containing nothing but cloth and dust. Emma tried not to think about what might remain of 5 small bodies after a century in the earth. Following her grandmother's instructions, she sprinkled salt in a circle around the bundles, then laid the herbs in 5 small piles between them. She lit the candles, placing one behind each bundle, and finally positioned herself at the head of the circle, the journal in one hand and the bell in the other. The house had grown unnaturally quiet. Even the usual creaks and settling sounds had ceased. As if the building itself was holding its breath, Emma began to read the words written in her grandmother's precise handwriting. "I call to the 5 who rest beneath this floor: Thomas, Ruth, Mary, Joseph, Elizabeth. I am the keeper of your rest, the guardian of your peace. I offer you protection from those who would disturb you and ask that you remain at your rest." As she spoke each name, Emma felt the air grow colder around her. The candle flames flickered despite the stillness. "By salt I purify this ground. By herb I sweeten your sleep. By flame I light your darkness. By bell I mark the boundary between your world and mine." Emma rang the silver bell 3 times. The clear, pure sound seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have. "Sleep now, children of sorrow. Sleep in peace until I call again. What was done to you cannot be undone, but in rest may you find the peace denied to you in life." As she finished speaking, one by one, the candles extinguished themselves. The circle of salt appeared to sink into the floorboards, vanishing before her eyes. The herb piles crumbled to dust, which was drawn into the trapdoor opening, as if pulled by an unseen force. Emma sat motionless, hardly daring to breathe. Had it worked? Or had she simply witnessed the effects of drafts and her own exhausted imagination? Then, from the darkness of the trapdoor rose a sound, 5 distinct sighs, like children settling into sleep. The bundles, which had seemed so insubstantial before, now appeared to take on weight and form, sinking slightly into the floorboards. With trembling hands, Emma carefully returned each bundle to its place beneath the floor. As she lowered the trapdoor back into position, she heard a final whisper, "Until next time, Keeper." Emma replaced the linoleum as best she could, then sank to the floor, her back against the kitchen cabinets. The ritual had taken more out of her than she'd expected. She felt drained, as if she'd run a marathon. A glance at her watch showed it was past midnight. Emma hauled herself to her feet and made her way upstairs to bed. For the first time since arriving, she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Morning brought a sense of clarity. Emma woke feeling rested, her mind sharper than it had been in days. Over coffee, she reviewed what she knew. 5 children had been killed by their parents in 1924, buried beneath the kitchen floor rather than in the cemetery. Her grandmother, and likely her great-grandmother before her, had performed monthly rituals to keep the children's spirits at rest. When the rituals were neglected, children in town had died. The academic in Emma still struggled with accepting the supernatural elements of the situation, yet she couldn't deny what she had experienced last night, nor the town's long history of protecting this secret. Emma decided to visit Ida Thornton again. The elderly woman had known her grandmother for decades and might provide answers to questions the journal didn't address. She found Ida in her small house on the edge of town, tending to a garden of herbs remarkably similar to those used in the ritual. The old woman didn't seem surprised to see her. "You've done it, haven't you? The ritual." Emma nodded. "How did you know? You have the look about you now. The weight." Ida gestured for Emma to sit on the porch swing beside her. "Your grandmother carried it for over 60 years. Why didn't she tell me, prepare me? She wanted something different for you. When your mother fled, taking you with her, Meredith thought perhaps the burden could end with her." Ida's gnarled fingers twisted together in her lap. "But the Hayes women have always been called back one way or another. What happens now? Do I sell the house? Call in authorities to properly bury those children?" Ida's eyes widened in alarm. "You must do no such thing. The ritual binds them to that place, keeps them from wandering. If their remains are moved, the binding breaks. And then what? Then they would seek vengeance, not just on the descendants of those who harmed them, but on all children nearby. Their innocence was taken violently. Such spirits often seek to take innocence in return." Emma thought of the sheriff's words about children dying when the rituals were neglected. So, I'm trapped here? I have to stay and perform this ritual every month for the rest of my life? Not necessarily here, but you must return monthly at minimum. Ida reached out, patting Emma's hand. Your grandmother managed a life around it. You can too. As Emma drove back to the house, she considered her options. She could reject all of this, the ritual, the responsibility, the belief in vengeful spirits. She could call in authorities, have the remains removed and properly buried, and return to her life in Boston. But what if Ida was right? What if the town's history of tragedy when the rituals were neglected wasn't coincidence? Emma pulled into the driveway, noticing for the first time that the house looked different in the midday sun, less oppressive somehow, as if it approved of her decision to perform the ritual. Inside, the atmosphere had changed as well. The air felt lighter, the rooms brighter. In the kitchen, Emma found the linoleum flat and even over the trapdoor, as if it had never been disturbed. On the table lay a child's drawing, 5 stick figures holding hands, standing beside a larger figure wearing what appeared to be a dress. The larger figure had been labeled in childish handwriting, "New Keeper." Emma picked up the drawing, a chill running through her despite the summer heat. She hadn't imagined it. The children were real, in whatever way spirits could be real. As she stood there holding the drawing, Emma made her decision. She would not abandon this responsibility as her mother had. She would learn what her grandmother knew, master the rituals, and find a way to incorporate this duty into her life. Perhaps in time she might even find a way to truly lay these spirits to rest, to finish what her grandmother had started. Outside, thunder rumbled as storm clouds gathered over Johnson Creek, but inside the house, for the first time since Emma's arrival, there was peace. A week after performing the ritual, Emma sat in Walter Simmons' office at the Historical Society, surrounded by stacks of documents. She had decided to approach her situation as she would any historical research project, methodically, thoroughly, leaving no stone unturned. "I need to understand the complete history," she explained to Walter. "Not just what happened to the Johnson family, but what came after. Who knew about the rituals? Were there ever attempts to remove the remains or exorcise the house?" Walter had been surprisingly forthcoming, perhaps relieved that Emma had accepted her role as keeper. He produced town records, church documents, and even personal correspondence that had been donated to the Historical Society over the years. "Your grandmother contributed most of these materials," he said, placing a box of letters on the desk. She was thorough in her documentation. Emma spent hours poring over the documents, piecing together a more complete picture. The Johnson tragedy had not been an isolated incident. Jacob Johnson had led a small religious sect that practiced extreme forms of faith healing and exorcism. Several families had been part of his congregation, meeting secretly in homes after the local church expelled them. Most disturbing were accounts from former members describing how Johnson had become convinced that a demonic presence had entered the town through his own children. His wife, Sarah, who had once been respected for her knowledge of herbal medicine, had apparently shared his delusions toward the end. "What happened to the other families in Johnson's congregation?" Emma asked Walter. "Most left town after the tragedy. A few stayed." Walter hesitated. "The Thorntons were among those who stayed." Ida Thornton. Emma felt a chill. She was part of Johnson's group. Her parents were. Ida was just a child then. Walter removed his glasses, cleaning them nervously. "There's something else you should know. The Thornton family and the Hayes family have been connected since your great-grandmother purchased the Johnson house." "Connected how?" "Iris Hayes, your great-grandmother, wasn't originally from Johnson Creek. She came here specifically to buy that property, bringing with her knowledge of certain rituals. The Thorntons helped her establish herself here, vouched for her with the townspeople who were suspicious of an outsider purchasing a house with such a dark history." Emma thought of Ida's herb garden, so similar to the plants used in her grandmother's ritual. Ida knows the ritual too, doesn't she? Walter nodded. The Hayes women have always been the keepers, but the Thorntons have been their helpers, their backups, I suppose you'd call them. When your mother left with you, Ida helped your grandmother maintain the rituals as she grew older and less able. This new information shifted Emma's understanding. Her family hadn't stumbled upon a tragedy and taken on a burden. They had come to Johnson Creek, specifically for that purpose. But why? Back at the house, Emma searched through the attic again, looking for anything that might explain her great-grandmother's connection to this place. In a corner she hadn't explored before, she found a steamer trunk with I. Hayes stamped on the side. Inside were personal items, clothing, jewelry, photographs, and at the bottom, a leather portfolio tied with ribbon. Emma brought it downstairs to examine in better light. The portfolio contained letters, most addressed to Iris Hayes, at an address in Louisville. They were from someone named Martha Johnson, a name Emma recognized from the Johnson family Bible. Martha had been Jacob Johnson's sister. As Emma read through the correspondence, a disturbing picture emerged. Martha had written to Iris, who appeared to be some kind of specialist in occult matters, begging for help after her brother's terrible acts. The letters spoke of binding the innocent and preventing further harm. The final letter, dated 1931, included these lines: "I have secured the property for you as requested. The townspeople are eager to sell, given its history. I believe your plan to contain what my brother unleashed is sound. The children's spirits must be bound to the place of their death, but in peace, not torment. Your ritual seems the most humane solution to an inhumane problem. I only pray that your descendants will understand the importance of maintaining the binding. If it should ever be broken completely, I fear what might emerge would no longer be the spirits of my nieces and nephews, but something far worse that has taken their form." Emma set the letter down, her hands trembling. The ritual wasn't just keeping the children's spirits at rest. It was containing something more dangerous that had taken advantage of their violent deaths to gain a foothold in this world. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Emma found Ida Thornton on the porch, looking grave. "You've been asking questions," the old woman said without preamble, "finding answers. Why didn't you tell me the whole truth?" Emma demanded, letting Ida inside. "About your family's connection to Johnson, about what's really beneath that floor." Ida sighed, lowering herself into a chair. "Because some knowledge is dangerous until you're ready for it. Your grandmother understood that. I performed the ritual without understanding what I was dealing with. And it worked, didn't it? Because you're a Hayes woman, because this is your birthright, whether you knew it or not." Ida's eyes, rheumy with age, fixed on Emma with surprising intensity. The children were innocent victims, but what happened to them, the manner of their deaths, the beliefs that drove their parents to kill them, opened a door. Your great-grandmother found a way to close that door, to bind whatever tried to come through to the remains of the children. So I'm not protecting the town from vengeful spirits. I'm containing something worse that's using their forms." Ida nodded slowly. "The distinction matters little in practice. The ritual must be maintained. The binding must hold, and if I refuse, if I walk away, then I will perform the ritual as I did when your grandmother grew too frail. But I am old, Emma. I won't live much longer." Ida leaned forward. "There must always be a keeper. If not you, then who?" The question hung in the air between them. Emma thought of her life in Boston, her career, the freedom she had always taken for granted. Then she thought of the drawing she had found, the childish figures holding hands with their new keeper. Whatever had happened in this house a century ago, innocent children had died. Their remains had never received proper burial or recognition. They had been used first by their father's madness, then by something darker that sought entry to this world, and finally by her own family in rituals of containment. "There has to be another way," Emma said finally. Another way? Ida's laugh was brittle. Your grandmother spent decades searching for one. What makes you think you'll succeed where she failed? Emma crossed to the kitchen table where her grandmother's journal lay. Because I have resources she didn't, academic connections, access to research she couldn't reach. She tapped the journal. And I have this, her lifetime of observations and attempts. Ida's expression softened slightly. Meredith was brilliant in her own way, self-taught in matters most scholars wouldn't touch. Then help me understand everything she learned. Emma pulled out a chair for Ida. Start from the beginning, no more half-truths. Over the next several hours, Ida revealed the full history as she knew it. Jacob Johnson had been a coal miner whose exposure to folkloric traditions underground, superstitions and rituals miners practiced for protection, had twisted together with his religious fervor. After a cave-in that he alone survived, Jacob became convinced he'd been spared to combat evil forces he believed were infiltrating the town through children. The miners had old beliefs, Ida explained, about spirits in the earth that could possess the living. Jacob thought his children showed signs, normal childhood behaviors he interpreted as demonic. Sarah Johnson, initially the voice of reason, eventually succumbed to her husband's delusions after their youngest child, Elizabeth, began experiencing what modern medicine would recognize as seizures. They performed their own twisted rituals on those poor children, Ida continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. Fasting, prayers, primitive exorcisms. When those failed, Jacob became convinced more drastic measures were needed. And the other members of his congregation, your parents? Most, including my parents, had already distanced themselves by then. They recognized Jacob's descent into madness. Ida's hands trembled slightly. But they did nothing to stop it. That guilt has hung over this town for generations. Emma opened her grandmother's journal, flipping to the final pages she hadn't yet read. The entries became increasingly desperate in the months before her death. I've found references in the Miskatonic University archives to a similar case in Massachusetts, 1831. The ritual used there eventually failed after 3 generations. I fear the same will happen here. The binding weakens with each passing. The children appear more frequently now, not just at night, but in daylight. They speak more clearly. They ask to be freed. The final entry chilled Emma's blood. I had the dream again. The children were standing in a circle, holding hands, but they were not children anymore. Their eyes were empty, their mouths too wide. Behind them stood a shadow that wore my face, my mother's face, my grandmother's face. It spoke with our voices, saying, "Soon. I fear I have failed. I pray Emma will understand what must be done when the time comes." Emma closed the journal. She knew she was dying. She knew the ritual was failing. Yes, Ida admitted, the binding requires blood from the Hayes line. As Meredith weakened, so did the ritual's power. Blood? Emma hadn't seen that requirement in the ritual instructions. Ida nodded toward the journal. The full ritual is there, in the center pages. What you performed was the monthly maintenance. The complete binding must be renewed every 30 years by a Hayes woman in her prime. Emma quickly found the pages Ida mentioned. They had been stuck together, whether by time or deliberate action, she couldn't tell. The complete ritual was far more complex than what she had performed, involving a sacrifice of the keeper's blood at specific points in the binding circle. The last full binding was performed by your grandmother in 1994, Ida said. It's due again. When? The winter solstice, December 21st of this year. Emma felt the weight of this revelation settle over her. If what Ida and the journal said was true, she had just over 4 months to either prepare for the complete binding ritual or find another solution. I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with, Emma said finally. Not just the history, but the entity itself. What is it? Where did it come from? Can it be destroyed rather than just contained? Ida looked uneasy. Such questions are dangerous. The more attention you give it, the stronger its influence becomes. My grandmother tried the same approach for decades, maintenance without understanding. I won't make the same mistake. Emma stood, suddenly decisive. I'm going to need access to whatever resources this town has. Church records, mining company documents, personal accounts, and I'll need to bring in some outside expertise. Outsiders? Ida's alarm was evident. The town has protected this secret, and the town has suffered for it. Emma's voice was firm. Children have died when the ritual failed. I won't risk more lives by keeping this contained in secrecy and superstition. That night, alone in the house, Emma felt a shift in the atmosphere. The peaceful feeling that had followed her performance of the ritual was fading. As she prepared for bed, she caught glimpses of movement in mirrors and shadows that shouldn't have been there. In her dreams, 5 children stood in her grandmother's kitchen, holding hands in a circle around the trap-door. They raised their heads in unison to look at her, their eyes dark and empty. "He's waking up," they said in perfect unison. "You need to hurry, Keeper." Emma woke with a start, heart pounding. The bedside clock read 3:33 a.m., the dead hour, as folklore would have it. From downstairs came the sound of something heavy being dragged across the kitchen floor. Grabbing her phone for its flashlight, Emma crept down the stairs. The kitchen was dark, but in the beam of her light, she could see that the linoleum covering the trap door had been pulled back. The wooden door itself lay askew, as if someone had tried to lift it, but lacked the strength. As Emma watched, frozen in the doorway, the trap door shuddered and rose an inch, then fell back with a thud. From beneath came a sound, not a child's voice now, but something deeper, older, speaking words in a language Emma didn't recognize. Moving on instinct, Emma grabbed the salt container she'd used for the ritual and poured a hasty circle around the trapdoor. The movement below ceased immediately. The temperature in the kitchen, which had dropped to an unseasonable chill, began to normalize. Emma sank into a chair, adrenaline making her hands shake. This was no longer about fulfilling a family obligation or solving a historical mystery. Something was actively trying to escape its binding. And if Ida and her grandmother were right, it would use the approaching 30-year deadline to break free completely. As dawn broke, Emma made a series of phone calls. First to her department chair at Boston University, requesting an emergency sabbatical, then to colleagues in anthropology, folklore studies, and religious history. Finally, to a number she'd hesitated to dial, Dr. Eldona Parker, an old friend from graduate school who had abandoned traditional academia to pursue what she called practical applications of folklore studies. Most in their field considered her work pseudo-scientific at best, but Emma had always respected Eleanor's intelligence and methodical approach, even to subjects others dismissed. "Eleanor, it's Emma Hayes. I need your help with something unusual." "Emma, it's been ages." Eleanor's voice warmed with genuine pleasure. "Unusual how? You've always been the strictest empiricist I know." "That's changing. I've inherited a property with a complex history. There's evidence of ongoing paranormal activity linked to a century-old tragedy." A pause. "You're serious?" "Deadly serious. I need someone who won't dismiss what's happening, but who also won't sensationalize it. Someone who can help me separate folklore from fact." "You've got my attention. Where is this place?" "Johnson Creek, Kentucky. How soon can you get here?" 3 days later, Emma stood in the driveway, watching a dust-covered SUV navigate the winding road to her grandmother's house. Eldona Parker had made good time from her research center in West Virginia, bringing with her a small team and equipment Emma couldn't begin to identify. Eleanor stepped out of the vehicle, looking much as she had in graduate school, tall and angular, with prematurely silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her eyes, however, held a sharpness that Emma remembered well. "You look like hell," Eleanor greeted her, pulling Emma into a brief hug. "It's been a challenging few weeks." Emma gestured toward the house. "Welcome to my inheritance." Eleanor's gaze traveled over the weathered farmhouse, her expression professional rather than superstitious. "Structurally sound, at least." Good bones. She turned to introduce her companions. This is Marcus Chen, my technical specialist, and Darius Webb, our historical researcher. Marcus was a young Asian-American man whose arms were covered in tattoos that looked suspiciously like protective sigils. Darius was an older black man with Professor written all over him, from his tweed jacket to his carefully trimmed beard. "I've prepared the second floor as a work area," Emma said, leading them inside, "and you can set up equipment wherever you need." Eleanor paused in the entryway, her head tilting slightly as if listening. "Interesting acoustics in this place." "You have no idea," Emma murmured. Upstairs, Emma had cleared out a spare bedroom, setting up tables and pinboards where she'd begun organizing her research. Eleanor's team examined her work with professional interest. "You've been busy," Darius commented, scanning the timeline Emma had constructed. "Your academic background shows." "I've approached this as I would any historical investigation," Emma explained, "gathering primary sources, establishing a chronology, identifying key figures." Eleanor moved to the center of the room, turning slowly. "But this isn't just history, is it? You mentioned paranormal activity. What have you experienced exactly?" Emma described everything: the voices, the handprints, the moving objects, the dreams, and finally, the attempt to open the trapdoor 3 nights ago. "And you performed a ritual?" Eleanor asked, her tone neutral. "A maintenance ritual, yes. According to my grandmother's journal, it temporarily reinforced the binding." Marcus, who had been setting up equipment near the window, looked up sharply. "Binding? Not banishing or cleansing?" "The Hayes family has been containing something, not eliminating it," Emma confirmed. "And according to the journal, the full binding ritual must be renewed every 30 years. The deadline is this December." Eleanor and her colleagues exchanged glances. "May we see this journal?" Darius asked. Emma hesitated only briefly before retrieving the journal from her bedroom. She watched as the 3 researchers examined it, Darius handling the aged pages with professional care. "The ritual elements are fascinating," Eleanor said after some time. "A syncretic blend of Appalachian folk practices, Christian symbolism, and something older. Your grandmother was either remarkably intuitive or had access to sources I'd love to examine." "What about the entity itself?" Emma pressed. "Have you encountered anything similar in your research?" Eleanor closed the journal carefully. "There are parallels. Many cultures have beliefs about liminal beings that can access our world through traumatic deaths, especially of children. The indigenous peoples of this region had stories of a hunger spirit that could wear the faces of the dead." But this isn't folklore," Emma insisted. "Something is down there trying to get out." "We're not dismissing your experiences," Darius assured her. "But context matters. Understanding the cultural framework can help identify what we're dealing with and how to address it effectively." Marcus had been silent, fiddling with a device that resembled a modified EMF detector. "Before we theorize further, we should gather data. Temperature variations, electromagnetic fluctuations, audio anomalies. Then we can establish baseline patterns." Emma felt a surge of relief at their methodical approach. These weren't ghost hunters seeking thrills or academics who would dismiss her experiences. They were researchers who took the paranormal seriously while maintaining scientific rigor. "There's one more person you should meet," Emma said. "Ida Thornton. Her family has been involved with this situation since the beginning. She knows things that aren't in any written record." That evening, Ida joined them for dinner, eyeing Eleanor's team with a mixture of suspicion and hope. The elderly woman had brought her own contribution to their research, a family Bible with margin notes recording the Thornton family's observations over generations. "My grandfather wrote this," Ida said, pointing to faded pencil marks beside Psalm 91. "The night after Jacob Johnson killed his children, every dog in town howled until dawn. The creek ran red with something that wasn't blood but looked like it. 3 pregnant women miscarried within days." Eleanor studied the notes with interest. Classic signs of environmental response to trauma. The psychic equivalent of an earthquake's aftershocks. It was more than that, Ida insisted. Something was trying to be born into this world. The Hayes women found a way to prevent it, but they couldn't destroy it. Why not? Marcus asked. If they had the power to bind it, because it's anchored to innocent souls, Ida interrupted. The Johnson children. To destroy the entity would be to destroy them too. A heavy silence fell over the group. Emma thought of the children's voices she'd heard, their drawings, their whispered warnings. Were they victims twice over, first of their father's madness, then of an entity using them as anchors? There has to be a way to separate them, she said finally. To free the children and deal with whatever is using them. That's been the question haunting your family for 3 generations, Ida replied softly. After Ida left, Eleanor's team began setting up monitoring equipment throughout the house, with particular focus on the kitchen. Marcus carefully placed sensors around the trapdoor, working within the salt circle Emma had maintained since the disturbance. We'll run baseline readings tonight, he explained. Then tomorrow we can attempt to provoke a response. Provoke? Emma felt a surge of alarm. Is that safe? Controlled provocation under monitoring conditions, Eleanor clarified. We need to understand what we're dealing with before we can formulate a response strategy. That night, Emma slept fitfully despite having others in the house. Her dreams were fragmented, flashes of the kitchen floor breaking open, of small hands reaching up from the earth, of a shadow that grew larger with each passing moment. She woke at dawn to find Eleanor already in the kitchen, reviewing data on a laptop. Anything? Emma asked, putting on coffee. Significant temperature drops between 2:30 and 4:15 a.m. Electromagnetic spikes that don't correspond to any household systems. Eleanor turned the screen to show Emma graphs and charts. And this. She pressed play on an audio file. At first, there was only the normal creaking of an old house. Then, faintly but distinctly, children's voices singing what sounded like a hymn. The singing gradually distorted, the pitch dropping, the words becoming unintelligible, until it resolved into a single adult voice, speaking in a language Emma didn't recognize. That's not English, Emma said unnecessarily. No, Eleanor agreed. Darius thinks it may be a corrupted form of an indigenous language from this region. He's consulting with a linguistics specialist. Marcus joined them, looking as if he hadn't slept. The readings are consistent with documented cases of residual haunting, layered with intelligent interaction. But there's something else, an energy signature I haven't seen before. Meaning? Meaning, whatever is down there, it's not just a standard haunting. It's not just the echoes of those children, and it's not a conventional demonic presence as described in religious literature. Emma thought of her grandmother's journal, of the decades spent maintaining a ritual whose true purpose she might not have fully understood. Could it be something unique to this location? Something that existed before the Johnson family tragedy? Eleanor looked thoughtful. The mining history of this region is significant. Caves, tunnels, places where the boundary between surface and depths is permeable. Jacob Johnson was a miner, Emma recalled. Ida mentioned he brought beliefs from underground. We need to look at geological surveys, Darius said, entering the kitchen with a stack of books. And mining company records. There might be something about this specific location that made it vulnerable. As the team dispersed to pursue various research angles, Emma found herself drawn to the kitchen floor. The salt circle remained unbroken, but the linoleum covering the trapdoor had developed a hairline crack down its center. Kneeling beside it, Emma whispered, "I'm trying to help you, all of you." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, so faintly she might have imagined it, a child's voice replied, "Hurry, he's getting stronger." October brought a chill to Johnson Creek, painting the surrounding hills in fiery reds and golds. Emma and Eleanor's team had spent weeks researching, monitoring, and carefully testing the boundaries of whatever was contained beneath the kitchen floor. The picture that emerged was both clearer and more disturbing than Emma had initially feared. The Johnson family tragedy had indeed created a weakness, a door, as Ida had called it, but the entity attempting to come through predated the killings by centuries. Darius had uncovered records from the original settlement of the area, describing a place the indigenous peoples had avoided, a hollow where the boundary between worlds was thin. When coal mining operations began in the late 1800s, tunnels had been dug perilously close to what local folklore called the Thin Place. Jacob Johnson, working those tunnels, had been exposed to something that gradually corrupted his mind, turning religious fervor into murderous delusion. The children were sacrifices, Eleanor explained, as the team gathered in the kitchen one evening. Not intentionally on Jacob's part. He genuinely believed he was saving them. But the act itself, the specific manner and location of their deaths, was exactly what the entity needed. "And my great-grandmother's ritual?" Emma asked. "A remarkable achievement," Darius said. "She created a binding that used the children's remains as anchors, but redirected the energy connection. Instead of the entity using the children as conduits, she made the children into a prison. At what cost to them?" Emma's voice was tight with emotion. In the weeks of research, she had come to feel a deep connection to the Johnson children, whose innocent lives had been cut short by their father's madness. Marcus, who had been monitoring his equipment, looked up sharply. "Something's changing. The readings have been steadily intensifying for the past hour." The lights flickered overhead. From beneath the floor came a low rumble, like distant thunder. The crack in the linoleum widened perceptibly. "The salt circle," Emma warned, but it was too late. The white granules scattered as if blown by an unseen wind. The trapdoor shuddered, then lifted an inch before dropping back down. The temperature in the kitchen plummeted, frost forming on the windows, despite the mild autumn evening outside. Eleanor moved quickly, pulling a vial of clear liquid from her bag and outlining a new circle around the trapdoor. "Everyone back," she ordered. "Marcus, start recording on all devices." The team retreated to the edges of the kitchen as the trapdoor lifted again, higher this time, then slammed back down with enough force to crack the surrounding floorboards. The sound that emerged was no longer the whimper of children, but a deep, guttural growl that made the dishes rattle in their cabinets. "What's happening?" Emma demanded, pressing her back against the counter. "Why now?" "The 30-year mark is approaching," Darius replied, his academic calm belied by the tremor in his voice. "The binding is weakening exponentially as the deadline nears." "That's not all," Eleanor said grimly. "Our research, our attention, has been feeding it. Every measurement, every recording, every question about its nature has been strengthening its awareness." The realization hit Emma like a physical blow. "We've been helping it break free." The trapdoor suddenly burst upward, splintering as it hit the ceiling. From the dark hole beneath rose not a physical form, but a churning column of shadow that seemed to absorb the kitchen light. Within the darkness, faces formed and dissolved. The Johnson children, Emma's grandmother, Jacob Johnson himself, and others Emma didn't recognize. Marcus's equipment sparked and died. Eleanor began reciting something in Latin, her voice steady despite the chaos. Darius pulled Emma toward the doorway, but she resisted. "The bundles!" she shouted over the howling that now filled the kitchen. "We need to secure the bundles!" Breaking free from Darius's grip, Emma lunged toward the open hole in the floor. The shadowy column whipped toward her, but as it neared, it seemed to hesitate, recoiling slightly. In that moment of respite, Emma reached into the hole, her hands finding the familiar cloth bundles. They felt warm now, pulsing with a rhythm like heartbeats. One by one, she pulled them out, cradling them against her chest. As the last bundle came free, the shadow creature let out a scream that shattered the kitchen windows. It writhed in apparent agony, the faces within it contorting in silent screams. The children were its anchor, Eleanor realized aloud, but also its prison. "Everyone out!" Emma commanded, backing toward the door with the bundle still clutched to her chest. "Now!" They fled the house as the shadow expanded, filling the kitchen and beginning to seep into adjacent rooms. Outside, they watched in horror as darkness spread behind every window, as if the house was filling with black smoke. "What have we done?" Darius whispered. Emma looked down at the bundles in her arms. Through the aged cloth, 5 distinct shapes pressed outward, tiny hands reaching for her. "We've changed the rules," she said, "for better or worse." Sheriff Daniels arrived minutes later, responding to reports of disturbances at the old Hayes place. He took one look at the darkened house, at Eleanor's team with their equipment, and at Emma cradling the small bundles, and his face went ashen. "You broke the binding," he said, not a question but an accusation. "The binding was already failing," Eleanor countered. "We've simply accelerated the inevitable and released God knows what into our town." The sheriff's hand moved to his sidearm, though what good a gun would do against what they'd witnessed was unclear. Emma stepped forward. "Not released. Not yet. We've separated the children from the entity. That's the first step toward truly ending this." The sheriff looked skeptical. "Ending it how? That thing in there has been contained for nearly a century because no one could figure out how to destroy it." "No one was willing to try," Emma corrected him. "My family chose containment because it was safer, easier than confronting the truth." "Which is?" Emma looked toward the house, where the darkness had begun to pulse rhythmically, like a giant heart. "That the entity can't exist here without anchors. The Johnson children were its unwilling hosts. Now it needs to find new ones." "The children of the town," Sheriff Daniels realized with horror. "Yes, but we have time. It's weakened by the separation. And I think I know how to end this permanently." Emma turned to Eleanor. "The full binding ritual in my grandmother's journal. Can it be modified? Not to contain, but to expel?" Eleanor considered this. "Theoretically, yes. The basic framework could be inverted, turning a circle of containment into a barrier of exclusion. But it would require tremendous power." "The Hayes bloodline," Emma said. "That's the key component in the original ritual. My blood." "Not just blood," Darius interjected. "The ritual requires sacrifice. Your grandmother gave years of her life to maintain the binding, her health, her freedom, her future. A complete reversal would demand even more." Emma looked down at the bundles in her arms. 5 innocent lives, twisted and used for a century. "Whatever it takes," she said quietly. "These children deserve peace. This town deserves safety." As they spoke, lights began coming on throughout Johnson Creek as residents noticed the disturbance. Cars appeared on the road leading to the Hayes property, bringing the curious and the concerned. "We need to move these remains somewhere safe," Emma told the sheriff, "and we need to warn the town. No children outside after dark, no one alone." The sheriff nodded grimly. "Where will you take them?" he asked, gesturing to the bundles. Emma thought for a moment. "The church. It's the oldest building in town, with its own protections." As they loaded into vehicles, Emma cast one last look at her grandmother's house. The darkness within seemed to watch her through the windows, a malevolent presence biding its time. The entity was no longer bound, but neither was it free. The final confrontation would come at the winter solstice, when the original 30-year binding would have ended. Emma had just over 2 months to prepare for a ritual, unlike anything her family had attempted before, not to contain evil, but to banish it completely. As she cradled the remains of 5 murdered children, Emma whispered a promise. "I will finish this. You will have peace." From the house came a sound like mocking laughter, carried on the cold October wind.